The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Olivia Thornton pressed one hand against her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick hard against her ribs as if protesting the rough journey across the Texas plains. It was August 1882, and Amarillo was nothing like the letters had promised, just a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the endless sky, heat shimmering off the dirt roads in waves that made everything look like it might dissolve into air at any moment. She climbed down from the stage with difficulty, her condition making every movement awkward, and the handful of people on the street turned to stare at the pregnant stranger with undisguised curiosity and something that looked uncomfortably close to judgment. Quinton Keller was shoeing a horse outside the livery stable when he caught sight of the woman stepping down from the stage, and his hammer missed the nail entirely, glancing off the horseshoe with a clang that made the animal sidestep nervously. He had been expecting a mail-order bride, had written those letters himself over the winter months when loneliness sat heavier on him than any physical burden, but nowhere in those carefully penned pages had he mentioned wanting a woman who was clearly carrying another man's child. The shock of it rooted him to the spot, his mind racing through possibilities, wondering if there had been some terrible mistake, if perhaps this woman was meant for someone else entirely. Olivia scanned the street, clutching the carpet bag that contained everything she owned in the world, searching for a face that might match the photograph she had tucked into her pocket. The man in the picture had serious eyes and a strong jaw, looked like someone who could be depended upon, and right now she needed dependability more than she had ever needed anything in her life. Her situation was desperate, made more so by the fact that the baby inside her was not the result of love or even choice, but of violence she still could not bring herself to speak about aloud. When she had answered Quinton Keller's advertisement in the Boston newspaper, she had told herself she would explain everything when she arrived, that an honest man would understand. But now that she was here with all these eyes on her, the words felt impossible to form. Quinton set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his leather apron, walking slowly toward the stagecoach with his heart hammering against his ribs. Up close, she was younger than he had imagined, maybe 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins during the journey and eyes the color of moss after rain. She looked exhausted and frightened, and despite his shock, he felt something protective rise up in his chest, an instinct that surprised him with its intensity. He stopped a few feet away from her, removed his hat out of habit, and cleared his throat. "Miss Thornton?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, gravelly from the dust and surprise. Olivia's eyes met his, and she recognized him immediately from the photograph despite the layer of grime that covered them both. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees went weak, and she had to lock them to stay upright. "Mr. Keller, yes, I am Olivia Thornton." She paused, swallowed hard, and forced herself to continue. "I understand this is not what you expected. I should have written, should have told you about my condition, but I was afraid you would refuse me, and I had nowhere else to go." The words hung in the hot air between them, honest and raw, and Quinton felt the stares of the townspeople boring into his back. The owner of the general store, Mabel Carson, stood on her porch with her arms crossed, watching this drama unfold, with the keen interest of someone who would be spreading the story before nightfall. The Reverend's wife had stopped her shopping to observe, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Quinton knew that whatever decision he made in this moment would define not just his future, but Olivia's as well, and probably that of the child she carried. He looked at her standing there in the blazing sun, her dress dusty from travel, and her face flushed with heat and anxiety, and something in him made a choice before his mind could overthink it. "Well," he said slowly, "the preacher is probably still at the church. We could go see him now if you're willing. Might be best to make this official before people start talking more than they already will." Olivia stared at him, unable to quite believe what she was hearing. "You would still marry me, even knowing that I am carrying another man's child?" Quinton shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze, but unwilling to look away. "I figure you have your reasons for your situation, and those reasons are your own until you decide to share them. I asked for a wife, and you came all this way to be one. Does not seem right to turn you away now." He paused, then added more quietly, "Though I would appreciate knowing if there is a man who might come looking for you, someone who might have a claim on you or the child." The relief in Olivia's expression shifted into something darker, a shadow passing across her features that made Quinton regret the question. "No," she said firmly. "There is no one who has any claim on me or my baby, no one who would ever want to claim us." The way she said it told Quinton more than her actual words, and he felt anger kindle in his gut, a hot fury directed at someone he had never met and never would. He had 3 sisters back in Missouri, knew what could happen to women in this world, the cruelties they sometimes endured. He nodded once, accepting her answer without pushing for more. "Then let us get you out of this, son. You look about ready to collapse." They walked together toward the small white church at the end of the main street, Olivia carrying her bag, and Quinton leading the way with his hat still in his hands. The Reverend, an older man named Samuel Hartford, who had been serving Amarillo's spiritual needs for the past decade, looked surprised when they appeared at his door, but agreed to perform the ceremony with only minimal hesitation. The Reverend's wife served as one witness, her earlier disapproval melting into something more charitable when she got a closer look at Olivia's exhausted state, and the church organist was pulled in to serve as the second. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike, the words familiar but strange when applied to 2 people who were essentially strangers to each other. Quinton's hand was warm and calloused when he slipped a simple gold band onto Olivia's finger, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother and had been waiting in his pocket for this moment. Olivia's voice shook when she spoke her vows, and she gripped Quinton's hand tighter than she meant to, anchoring herself to this unexpected kindness. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quinton hesitated for just a moment before leaning in to press a chaste kiss to Olivia's cheek, careful and respectful, not presuming more than that. They signed the marriage certificate with the Reverend's fountain pen, making it legal and binding, and then they were standing outside the church again, married but still strangers, unsure of what came next. Quinton cleared his throat and gestured toward the edge of town. "My ranch is about 3 miles out. It is not much, just a small house and some land for cattle and horses, but it is solid and weatherproof. I have a wagon at the livery. I can take you out there now if you're up for the ride." Olivia nodded, too overwhelmed to form words, and followed him back through town to collect his wagon. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, turning the sky into shades of orange and pink that were almost painfully beautiful. She climbed onto the wagon seat with Quinton's assistance, his hand steady under her elbow, and they rolled out of Amarillo with the town's curious eyes following them all the way. The ranch, when they reached it, was indeed modest but well-maintained. The house was built of sturdy timber with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides, and there was a barn, a corral with several horses, and a chicken coop from which came the soft sounds of hens settling in for the evening. Quinton helped Olivia down from the wagon and carried her bag to the house, pushing open the door to reveal a single large room that served as kitchen and living space, with 2 smaller rooms branching off that must be bedrooms. "I apologize for the state of things, Quinton said, looking around at the sparse furnishings with fresh eyes, seeing it as Olivia must see it. "I have been living alone for 3 years now, and I guess I stopped noticing when things got shabby. The bedroom on the right is yours. I will take the other one. I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you beyond what you are willing to give. This marriage can be whatever we make it, and there is no rush to figure that out." Olivia set down her bag and looked at him properly for the first time since the ceremony, really studied the man she had just bound her life to. He was tall, probably 30 or 31, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His eyes were hazel, more green than brown in the evening light, and there were lines around them that suggested he smiled more than he frowned, though he was not smiling now. He looked uncomfortable but sincere, and that sincerity was perhaps the most precious thing anyone had offered her in a very long time. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "You did not have to do this, any of this, and I'm more grateful than I can express. I know this is not what you wanted when you advertised for a wife." Quinton shrugged, embarrassed by her gratitude. Life rarely gives us exactly what we plan for. We make do with what comes. He moved toward the kitchen area, clearly eager to have something practical to focus on. "You must be hungry. Let me fix us something to eat, and then you should rest. That journey from Boston must have been exhausting." Olivia wanted to insist on helping to prove she could be useful despite her condition, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She sank into one of the wooden chairs at the small kitchen table and watched as Quinton moved efficiently around the space, building up the fire in the stove, slicing bread, frying bacon and eggs. The domestic scene felt surreal, as if she had stepped into someone else's life, and she half expected to wake up still on the stagecoach with this all revealed as a dream born of desperation. They ate in a silence that was not quite comfortable, but not entirely awkward either, both of them too tired and overwhelmed to make conversation. Quinton showed Olivia to her room afterward, setting her bag on the bed and lighting the oil lamp on the small dresser. The room was plain but clean, with a real mattress and sheets that smelled of sunshine and soap. There was a window that looked out over the darkening plains, and Olivia could see stars beginning to appear in the vast Texas sky. "There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash," Quinton said from the doorway. "And if you need anything during the night, I am just across the main room. Do not hesitate to wake me." Olivia turned to face him, one hand unconsciously resting on her belly where the baby had started moving again, small flutters that still felt miraculous despite everything. "Why did you really do this? Accept me as I am?" Quinton was quiet for a long moment, leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed. "My mother died when I was 12, he finally said. "My father raised 4 children on his own, and it was hard, but we managed. When I was 16, a woman came through our town, pregnant and alone, running from something she would not name. She asked for work, for shelter, for anything, and every single person turned her away. Every single one, including the church. I watched her walk out of town with nothing, and I've always wondered what happened to her if she survived. If her baby did. I told myself then that if I ever had the chance to do better, to be better than what I witnessed that day, I would take it." The story settled into the space between them, explaining so much, and Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. She had cried so much over the past months that she thought she had no tears left, but apparently there were always more. "I was attacked," she heard herself say, the words emerging before she could stop them. 6 months ago by a man I trusted, someone who worked for my father. When I told my parents what happened, they did not believe me. They said I must have encouraged him, must have done something to bring it on myself. When they realized I was pregnant, they cast me out, said I was a shame to the family name." Quinton's jaw tightened, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I am sorry. For what happened to you and for your parents' failure to protect you, no one should have to endure that." Olivia wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I am telling you this so you know the truth, so you do not wonder or imagine something worse. And I'm telling you because I want no secrets between us, not about this." He nodded slowly, respecting the gift of her honesty. "Thank you for trusting me with that. It changes nothing about what I said earlier. You are my wife now, and that baby will be mine in every way that matters. Anyone who says different will answer to me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice sparked something warm in Olivia's chest, a feeling she had not expected to ever experience again. She had armored herself against hope, had learned to expect nothing from people, but here was this cowboy she had just met offering her exactly what she had secretly dreamed of but had been too afraid to ask for. "Good night, Quinton." "Good night, Olivia." The days that followed established a tentative rhythm between them. Quinton rose before dawn each morning to tend to the animals and work the land, and Olivia did what she could around the house despite his protests that she should be resting. She was determined not to be a burden, to prove she could contribute, and she threw herself into cooking and cleaning and mending with an energy born of gratitude and stubborn pride. Quinton came in for meals dusty and tired, and they would sit together at the table making careful conversation, learning about each other in small increments. She discovered that he had come to Texas 5 years earlier, buying this land cheap and building everything himself with the help of his neighbors. He had a younger brother still in Missouri and those 3 sisters he had mentioned, all of them married with children now. He loved horses more than cattle, though cattle paid better, and he had a particular fondness for the wild mustangs that still roamed the plains in small herds. He read voraciously when he had time, preferring adventure novels and history, and he had a quiet sense of humor that emerged gradually as he became more comfortable around her. Olivia told him about growing up in Boston, about a childhood that had been privileged but cold, parents who cared more about social standing than genuine connection. She had loved to paint before her world fell apart, had dreams of becoming an artist, but she had left all her supplies behind when she fled. She missed the ocean sometimes, the smell of salt air and the cry of gulls, but there was something about the endless openness of Texas that spoke to a part of her she had not known existed. She was scared about the birth, terrified actually, but she was trying not to think about it too much. 2 weeks after her arrival, Olivia was hanging laundry on the line Quinton had strung between 2 posts when she felt the first sharp pain low in her back. She straightened up slowly, telling herself it was nothing, just the normal aches of late pregnancy, but then another pain came, stronger this time, wrapping around from her back to her belly. She gripped the laundry basket, breathing through it, and when it passed, she hurried as fast as her bulk would allow back toward the house. Quinton was in the barn, she knew, working on repairing some damaged stalls, so she called for him from the porch, her voice higher and tighter than she intended. He appeared in the barn doorway immediately, took one look at her face, and broke into a run, covering the distance between them in seconds. "The baby?" he asked, and she nodded, another contraction already building. "I think so. It is too early, though. I should have 2 more months." Quinton's mind raced. The nearest doctor was in Amarillo, 3 miles away, and he had no idea if the man would even be in town or if there was time to fetch him. He had helped birth calves and foals dozens of times, had even assisted when his youngest sister went into labor during a blizzard that trapped the family in their farmhouse, but this felt different, more frightening because it mattered so much more. He helped Olivia inside and settled her on the bed in her room, his hands shaking slightly despite his best efforts to appear calm. "Tell me what you need. What can I do?" Olivia gripped his hand as another contraction peaked, her fingernails digging into his palm. "I do not know. I have never done this before. My mother always said births took hours, sometimes days. Maybe there is still time to get the doctor?" Quinton hesitated, torn between the desire to fetch professional help and the fear of leaving her alone. The decision was made for him when Olivia's water broke, soaking through her dress and the sheets beneath her. Her eyes went wide with panic, and he knew with sudden certainty that there was no time, that he would be the one to see this through. "All right," he said, forcing his voice into something steady and reassuring. "All right, we can do this. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, right? Your body knows what to do. We just have to help it along." Over the next several hours, Quinton discovered reserves of courage and tenderness he had not known he possessed. He boiled water and gathered clean linens, remembering what he had seen during his sister's labor. He stayed by Olivia's side, letting her grip his hands during contractions that grew progressively stronger and closer together. He wiped her face with cool cloths when she grew feverish, and murmured encouragement when she was certain she could not continue. Olivia had never experienced pain like this, pain that consumed everything else until there was nothing in the world but the overwhelming pressure and the desperate need to push. She heard herself making sounds she did not recognize, animal sounds of effort and fear. And through it all, Quinton's voice was there, steady and calm, telling her she was doing well, that she was strong, that it would be over soon. When the baby finally crowned, Quinton positioned himself to catch the emerging child. his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. He had never been more terrified or more focused in his entire life. "One more push," he told Olivia. "One more big push, and your baby will be here." Olivia gathered every scrap of strength she had left and pushed with everything in her, feeling something give way, and suddenly the pressure was gone, and she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's indignant cry. She collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief and exhaustion, as Quinton worked with shaking hands to clear the baby's airways and tie off the cord with twine the way he had seen done with livestock. "It is a boy," Quinton said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have a son, Olivia." He wrapped the baby in a clean flannel shirt, since they had no proper infant clothes prepared, and placed the tiny bundle in Olivia's waiting arms. The baby was smaller than he should have been, early as he was, but he was breathing well and his cry was strong. He had a shock of dark hair and his mother's nose, and when he opened his eyes briefly before screwing them shut against the light, they were a deep, indeterminate blue. Olivia looked down at her son and felt her heart crack open in a way that was both painful and transcendent. She had spent the entire pregnancy trying not to feel too much, trying to protect herself from attachment to this child who was a product of violence, but now that he was here, all of that careful distance dissolved. He was hers, wholly and completely hers, and she loved him with a fierceness that shocked her. Quinton cleaned up as best he could, dealing with the afterbirth and changing the soiled linens with an efficiency that spoke to his ranch experience. When everything was as settled as he could make it, he sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly aware of how much his hands were shaking now that the crisis had passed. He had delivered the baby. He had actually done it, and both mother and child seemed to be all right. "Thank you," Olivia whispered, not looking up from her son's face. "I could not have done that without you." Quinton shook his head. "You did all the hard work. I just caught him." She finally looked up at him, and there were tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Will you hold him, just for a moment? I need to see something." Confused but willing, Quinton carefully accepted the baby into his arms, terrified by how fragile the little boy felt. The baby squirmed and made small, squeaking noises, and something shifted in Quinton's chest, a tumble of feeling he had no words for. This was not his child by blood, but as he sat there holding this tiny life, he found that it did not matter. He had made a promise to Olivia, and he was making one silently now to this baby. He would be a father to him, would protect and provide and love him, and no one would ever make this boy feel less than wanted. Olivia watched Quinton's face as he held her son and saw the exact moment when he fell in love. It was there in the softening of his features, the gentle way he adjusted his hold to cradle the baby more securely, the slight smile that curved his mouth as the baby's tiny hand wrapped reflexively around his finger. She had not expected this, had not dared hope that Quinton would bond with a child that was not his, but here was the evidence right in front of her. "He needs a name," Quinton said softly, reluctant to hand the baby back, but knowing he should. Olivia accepted her son and settled him against her chest, feeling his warm weight and rapid heartbeat. "I was thinking, Thomas, if you approve, after my grandfather, who was the only person in my family who ever truly cared for me." "Thomas Keller," Quinton tested the name. "I like it. It is a strong name." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and steep learning curves as they both adjusted to life with an infant in the house. Thomas was a fussy baby, which the doctor from Amarillo said was normal for one born early, and he needed to be fed frequently to help him gain weight. Olivia was exhausted constantly, and Quinton took over more of the household tasks to let her rest between feedings, working through the night sometimes to keep up with both the ranch work and the housework. During one particularly difficult night when Thomas would not stop crying no matter what they tried, Quinton took the baby from Olivia's arms and told her to sleep, carrying the screaming infant out onto the porch so his cries would not keep her awake. He walked back and forth in the cool night air, the baby pressed against his shoulder, and sang old songs his mother had sung to him, half-forgotten lullabies in a voice rough from disuse. Gradually, Thomas's cries faded to whimpers and then to silence as he finally succumbed to sleep. Quinton kept walking anyway, afraid to stop in case the movement was what was keeping the baby settled, and looked up at the stars scattered across the black vault of sky. He thought about how his life had changed in just a few short weeks, how he had gone from lonely bachelor to husband and father, and marveled at how right it felt despite how strange and sudden it had been. Inside, Olivia lay awake despite her exhaustion, listening to Quinton's footsteps on the porch and his quiet singing. Something was growing between them, something more than gratitude or convenience, and it both thrilled and frightened her. She had not expected to feel attraction to anyone ever again after what had happened to her, had assumed that part of her was permanently broken, but increasingly she found herself noticing things about Quinton. The way his hands looked when he held Thomas, gentle despite their strength. The sound of his laugh when something genuinely amused him. The fact that he never made her feel pressured or uncomfortable, always giving her space and respect. As September gave way to October and the brutal Texas heat finally began to ease, life on the ranch found its rhythm. Thomas grew stronger and more alert, and Olivia's body healed from the birth. Quinton taught her to ride, starting her on his gentlest mare, and they would sometimes ride out together in the evenings with Thomas secured in a sling against Olivia's chest, showing her the boundaries of their property and the beauty of the land he was working so hard to make productive. One evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Thomas dozing between them in the small cradle Quinton had built from scrap wood, Olivia worked up the courage to say something she'd been thinking for weeks. "I know we married out of necessity," she began. And Quinton turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable. "I know you did it to help me, and I will be forever grateful for that kindness. But I want you to know that if you ever decide you want a real marriage, one that is more than just an arrangement, I would be willing to try, if you were interested." Quinton was quiet for so long that Olivia began to regret speaking, but then he reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I have been wanting to say something similar, but was not sure how you would feel about it. I know you have been through trauma, and the last thing I want is to make you uncomfortable. But Olivia, somewhere in these past months, I have come to care for you deeply. You are smart and strong and braver than you give yourself credit for. When I look at you, I do not see someone I am obligated to. I see a woman I am falling in love with." Olivia's breath caught, and she turned to look at him fully, searching his face for any sign that he was saying what he thought she wanted to hear rather than what he truly felt. But there was nothing but sincerity in his eyes, a vulnerability that told her he was taking as much of a risk in speaking as she had been. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way about anyone, but you have been so patient and kind, and every day I find myself wanting more, wanting to be closer to you." Quinton stood up slowly, drawing her to her feet, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent, and looked at her for a long moment before finally lowering his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and careful, a question more than a demand, and Olivia answered by leaning into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart racing beneath her palms. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Quinton rested his forehead against hers. "We can take this as slow as you need. There is no rush. I just needed you to know how I feel." Olivia nodded, too overcome to speak, and they stood there together in the gathering darkness, holding each other while Thomas slept peacefully nearby, unaware of the significant moment unfolding around him. Their relationship deepened gradually over the following months, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection that grew stronger every day. They began sharing more, opening up about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Quinton told her about the loneliness that had driven him to advertise for a wife, the way the silence of the house had sometimes felt suffocating. Olivia told him about her dreams of painting again, and Quinton surprised her a few weeks later with art supplies ordered from a catalog, insisting that she should not give up something that brought her joy. By the time winter arrived, bringing cold winds and occasionally freezing temperatures that were shocking after the brutal summer heat, they had moved past careful friendship into something deeper and more intimate. Olivia moved her things into Quinton's bedroom on a night in late December when the wind was howling outside and the house felt too big and empty with them sleeping in separate rooms. They came together with tenderness and care, Quinton endlessly patient as Olivia worked through the ghosts of her trauma. And afterward they lay tangled in each other's arms, and Olivia felt something inside her that had been clenched tight finally begin to relax. Thomas celebrated his first Christmas at 6 months old, too young to understand but delighted by the colored paper they wrapped his small gifts in. Quinton had carved him a small horse from wood, sanded smooth so there were no rough edges, and Olivia had sewn him new clothes from fabric she had ordered. They attended the Christmas service at the church in Amarillo, and if anyone still whispered about the circumstances of their marriage, they did it quietly enough that Olivia could ignore it. The winter was mild by northern standards, but still challenging, with ice storms that kept them housebound for days at a time and cold that required constantly feeding the fire to keep the house warm. Quinton taught Olivia how to play poker using matchsticks for currency, and she taught him the parlor games of her childhood. They took turns walking the floor with Thomas when he was teething and fussy, and slowly, steadily, they built something that felt unshakably solid. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the plains in brilliant colors, and Olivia set up her easel on the porch to paint the landscape, Thomas playing at her feet with his wooden horse and a collection of smooth stones Quinton had gathered for him. She had never been happier, she realized one day while mixing paints. Despite everything that had happened to bring her to this point, despite the pain and fear and trauma, she had somehow ended up exactly where she was meant to be. Quinton noticed the change in her, the way she smiled more readily now, the lightness in her step. She was becoming the woman she was meant to be before life had tried to break her, and he felt privileged to witness it, to be part of her healing. He loved her fiercely, loved Thomas like his own blood, and could not imagine his life without them anymore. In April, Olivia realized she had missed her monthly courses and felt a familiar flutter of nausea in the mornings. She waited a few more weeks to be certain before telling Quinton, unsure how he would react to the news of a pregnancy so soon. They were sitting at the kitchen table after Thomas had been put to bed, and she reached across to take his hand, her heart pounding. "I have something to tell you," she said, and Quinton immediately gave her his full attention, concern creasing his forehead. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Quinton just stared at her, processing the words. And then a grin split his face so wide it must have hurt. He stood up so fast his chair toppled backward, came around the table, and swept her into his arms, spinning her in a circle before remembering himself and setting her down carefully. "Truly? We are having a baby?" Olivia laughed at his enthusiasm, some part of her that had been worried relaxing completely. "Yes, truly. I think I'm about 2 months along, so the baby should come in November or December." Quinton knelt down in front of her and placed his hands on her still flat stomach, looking up at her with such love and wonder that Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "A baby. Our baby. Thomas is going to be a big brother." The pregnancy progressed smoothly this time, without the fear and shame that had clouded Olivia's first. She reveled in each stage, in the growing swell of her belly and the baby's movements, and Quinton was endlessly fascinated by all of it, constantly resting his hand on her stomach to feel the baby kick. Thomas, now toddling around and getting into everything, seemed to sense that something was different, becoming more protective of his mother and occasionally trying to pat her belly in imitation of Quinton. As summer approached and the heat returned with a vengeance, Quinton hired a local teenager named Billy to help with the ranch work, not wanting Olivia to have to take on extra tasks while pregnant in the heat. Billy was 17, gangly and enthusiastic, and he worshipped Quinton with the devotion of a boy desperate for a male role model. He was good with Thomas too, playing with the toddler and making him laugh with silly faces and games. Olivia spent the hot afternoons inside with Thomas, keeping them both cool and out of the brutal sun, and she painted more than ever, working on a series of portraits of their little family. She painted Quinton working with the horses, all lean strength and concentration. She painted Thomas sleeping, his face peaceful and perfect. She painted the landscape at different times of day, trying to capture the way the light transformed everything it touched. In August, on the first anniversary of her arrival in Amarillo, Quinton took Olivia and Thomas into town for a celebration. They had dinner at the small restaurant, walked through the general store where Olivia bought fabric for baby clothes, and stopped by the church to leave a donation in thanks for the year they had been given. Reverend Hartford blessed them and their growing family, and Mabel Carson from the general store, who had been one of the disapproving onlookers that first day, told Olivia that everyone in town could see she and Quinton were good together, that they had made a real marriage out of unpromising beginnings. On the ride back to the ranch, with Thomas asleep in Olivia's lap and the stars emerging overhead, Quinton reached over to take her hand. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Truly happy?" Olivia squeezed his fingers and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be. A year ago I was terrified and alone, and certain my life was over. Now I have a husband I love, a beautiful son, another baby on the way, and a home that feels like mine. You saved me, Quinton." He shook his head. "We saved each other. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something meaningful. Every day with you and Thomas is a gift." November arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of winter on the wind. Olivia's belly was large now, the baby active and strong, and she was ready for the pregnancy to be over, tired of being ungainly and uncomfortable. Quinton had arranged for the doctor from Amarillo to come stay at the ranch when her time drew near, not wanting to take any chances this time, but as it turned out, the baby had his own timing. It was a cold night in late November when Olivia woke Quinton with a hand on his shoulder and told him the contractions had started. He immediately went to build up the fire and boil water, years older and considerably more confident than he had been when Thomas was born. Thomas, now 19 months old and sleeping in the small room they had set up for him, was oblivious to the activity in the main part of the house. The labor progressed faster than Olivia's first, her body remembering what to do, and by dawn, she was holding a squalling baby girl with wisps of blonde hair and her father's hazel eyes. They named her Clara, after Quinton's mother, and Thomas was absolutely fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her tiny hands and watch her every movement. With 2 children now, life became simultaneously more chaotic and more joyful. The house was filled with noise and laughter, with the sound of Thomas's questions about everything and Clara's baby babbling. Quinton expanded the ranch, buying more land and hiring Billy full-time, building toward a future that looked increasingly prosperous. Olivia sold some of her paintings through the general store and was surprised by the demand for them, people wanting to own a piece of the Texas landscape as she saw it. The years unfolded in a pattern of seasons and growth. Thomas started school in Amarillo when he turned 6, riding into town each day with Quinton and walking to the small schoolhouse. Clara was a sunny, happy child who followed her brother everywhere and charmed everyone she met. When Thomas was 7 and Clara was 5, Olivia gave birth to twin boys, James and Samuel, who were identical and mischievous from the very beginning. Quinton built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding bedrooms and a larger kitchen, a proper dining room for the family meals that had become increasingly crowded around the old small table. The ranch prospered as his reputation for breeding quality horses spread, and he was able to hire more hands to invest in better stock to build the kind of legacy he wanted to leave his children. Olivia's paintings grew in popularity, and she had a small exhibition in Amarillo that drew people from surrounding towns. She painted her family obsessively, wanting to capture every stage of her children's growth, the way Quinton's face had matured and deepened with age and happiness, She painted the ranch through all the seasons, the landscape she had come to love as much as she loved the people who shared it with her. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his father and showed early talent for training them. He knew the truth of his parentage. Olivia and Quinton, having sat him down when he was old enough to understand, and explained gently how he had come to be part of their family. Thomas had listened carefully and then said that Quinton was his father in every way that mattered, and that was the end of it. He never asked about the biological father, never seemed troubled by the story, and Quinton loved him with the same fierceness he loved all their children. Clara was artistic like her mother, always drawing or making up elaborate stories. The twins were wild and adventurous, constantly getting into scrapes and keeping everyone on their toes. The house was full and loud and messy, and it was everything Olivia and Quinton had never known they wanted. When Thomas was 12, a man came to the ranch asking to buy one of Quinton's prize stallions. The man was from Boston, and during the negotiation, he mentioned knowing Olivia's family, asked if she might be related to the Thorntons who had a shipping business there. Olivia, who overheard the conversation from the porch, felt her heart skip, but the man continued, saying he had heard the family had fallen on hard times, that the business had failed and they had moved away somewhere. No one was quite sure where. Later, when the man had gone and the children were occupied with their various activities, Olivia told Quinton what she had heard. She waited for some feeling to emerge, grief or regret or even satisfaction at her family's misfortune, but there was nothing. Those people were strangers to her now, had made themselves strangers years ago with their cruelty. Her family was here, in this house, in the children playing outside and the man standing beside her with his arm around her waist. "Do you ever regret it?" Quinton asked. "Leaving Boston, the life you could have had?" Olivia turned to face him, placing her hands on either side of his face, and looked at him with absolute certainty. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, you, these children, this is everything I could have dreamed of and more. I found my home when I stepped off that stagecoach 15 years ago, even though I did not know it yet." Quinton kissed her then, long and slow and full of the love that had grown and deepened over their years together, and Olivia kissed him back with equal passion, grateful every day for the man who had looked at a desperate pregnant woman and seen someone worth saving. The children grew and changed as children do. Thomas fell in love at 18 with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a smart, strong girl named Rebecca, who could ride as well as any man, and who looked at Thomas like he hung the moon. They married when Thomas was 20, and Quinton gave them a portion of the ranch land to start their own homestead. The wedding was a huge celebration with half the county attending, and Olivia cried happy tears as she watched her firstborn son pledge his life to someone who would love and value him. Clara went to San Antonio to study art when she was 17, the first in the family to pursue formal education beyond the basics. She came home during summers and holidays with stories of the city and the art world, her talent blossoming under professional instruction. She sold her first painting to a gallery when she was 19, and Olivia framed the telegram announcing the sale, hanging it proudly in the parlor. The twins, now 15, were talking about becoming Texas Rangers, drawn to adventure and the idea of upholding justice. Quinton was not sure how he felt about that, worried about the dangers, but he also knew his sons needed to find their own paths just as Thomas and Clara had. At 52, Quinton's hair was more gray than brown now, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth, but he was still strong and capable, still working the ranch alongside his hired hands and Thomas. At 48, Olivia had silver threading through her auburn hair and reading glasses for close work, but her eyes were still bright, and her smile still took Quinton's breath away. They sat on the porch one evening in late summer, the same porch where they had sat so many times over the past 21 years, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. The house behind them was quieter now with Thomas married and Clara in San Antonio, though the twins made enough noise for twice their number. From Thomas's homestead a half-mile away, they could see smoke rising from his chimney, could picture him and Rebecca and their year-old daughter sharing their evening meal. "We did well," Quinton said quietly, reaching over to take Olivia's hand, a gesture so familiar now that they rarely noticed it anymore. Built something good. Olivia squeezed his fingers, leaning her head against his shoulder, and looked out at the land that had become hers, at the life they had created together from the most unlikely beginnings. We did better than well. We built something extraordinary. And there, on that porch in the fading light, with the sounds of their remaining children drifting through the open windows behind them and the whole sprawl of their lives spread out before them, Olivia Keller knew with absolute certainty that she was right. She had come to Texas desperate and alone, carrying another man's child and with no hope for the future. She had been met by a stranger with kind eyes who had seen past her circumstances to the person she was beneath. And together, over the course of more than 2 decades, they had built a life that was richer and more beautiful than anything either of them could have imagined. The baby she had carried in fear and shame had grown into a fine man with his own family now, and the man who had delivered that baby with shaking hands and fierce determination had become the love of her life, her partner in every sense of the word. They had weathered difficulties and celebrated triumphs, had raised 4 children who were growing into remarkable adults, had created a home that was filled with love and laughter and the kind of deep contentment that came from choosing each other every single day. As darkness settled over the Texas plains and the first stars appeared in the vast sky overhead, Quinton pressed a kiss to Olivia's hair and murmured, "I love you." Olivia smiled, turning her face up to kiss him properly, and answered, "I love you too. Always." And in that moment, with 21 years of marriage behind them and however many more stretched out ahead, surrounded by the family they had built and the land they had nurtured, Olivia Keller was absolutely, completely, perfectly happy. The scared young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach so long ago was gone, transformed by time and love and the steady devotion of a good man into someone stronger and surer. She had been delivered from despair just as surely as Quinton had delivered her son, and she had found not just survival, but joy, not just acceptance, but belonging. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived 7 months pregnant and the cowboy who delivered her baby had become a legend of sorts in Amarillo, told and retold until it took on mythic qualities. But for Quinton and Olivia, it was simply their beginning. The first chapter in a love story that had unfolded across decades and would continue to unfold for all the years they had left. They had taken a moment of desperation and transformed it into a lifetime of love, and that was the greatest achievement either of them could imagine. Years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Thomas and Rebecca's family grew to include 3 children, giving Quinton and Olivia the joy of being grandparents. Clara married a fellow artist she met in San Antonio, bringing him home to meet the family and settling eventually in a small town halfway between San Antonio and Amarillo, so she could pursue her art career while still remaining close to her roots. The twins did indeed become Texas Rangers, making their parents both proud and anxious every time they rode out on assignment. Quinton and Olivia grew old together with grace, their love deepening into something comfortable and enduring that needed no words to express. They still worked the ranch, though they handed over more responsibility to Thomas and their hired hands, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, still reached for each other in the night with the same need for connection that had marked their years together. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration. There was food and music and dancing, stories told and retold about the family's history. Toasts raised to the couple who had built this remarkable legacy. Olivia looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the man beside her who had given her all of this, and felt a gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Olivia and Quinton climbed the stairs to their bedroom, moving more slowly than they once had, but still hand in hand. Quinton helped Olivia with the buttons on her dress as he had done thousands of times before, and she leaned back against him, closing her eyes and savoring the familiar warmth of his body. 30 years, she murmured. How did we get here so fast? Quinton wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder, and looked at their reflection in the mirror. Two people grown old together, their faces lined with time, but their eyes still bright. "One day at a time," he said, "one moment at a time, and I would not change a single one of them." Olivia turned in his arms and kissed him, still finding magic in the touch of his lips against hers even after all these years. "Neither would I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Quinton Keller. You and the life we built together." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew their own, and afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around them. Through the open window came the smell of grass and horses, the distant call of a night bird, the whisper of wind across the plains. "Thank you," Olivia said quietly into the darkness, "for seeing me that day when I stepped off the stagecoach, for not turning away." Quinton tightened his arms around her. "Thank you for being brave enough to come, for trusting me when you had no reason to. You made my life mean something, Olivia. You and our children, this is what I was meant for." They drifted off to sleep that way, wrapped up in each other. Two people who had found their way to each other through the most unlikely of circumstances and had built something that would outlast them both. The ranch would continue through Thomas and his children. Clara's art would hang in galleries and homes, preserving the beauty of this landscape for generations to come. The twins would serve their time as rangers and eventually settle down to families of their own. But more than any of that, Quinton and Olivia had proven that love could grow in the most unexpected places, that kindness could transform lives, that two broken people could come together and make each other whole. They had taken a moment of desperate need and met it with compassion, and from that single act had sprung decades of happiness and a family tree that would continue to branch and grow long after they were gone. As the years advanced into their 70s, they slowed down considerably but never stopped loving fiercely. Quinton's hands grew stiff with arthritis, but he still reached for Olivia every morning when he woke. Olivia's eyes grew dim, but she still painted, capturing memories and moments with slightly shaky brushstrokes that somehow made the images more poignant. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, the fixed point around which everyone else orbited. When Quinton fell ill in his 78th year, a fever that settled in his lungs and would not break, the whole family gathered at the ranch. Olivia refused to leave his bedside, holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together, reminding him of every precious moment they had shared. His children and grandchildren came in shifts to say goodbye, to tell him they loved him, to thank him for the life he had given them. On his last night, when it was just Olivia beside him in the darkness, Quinton opened his eyes and looked at her with perfect clarity despite his illness. "Do not grieve too long," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Live, Olivia. Keep painting. Keep smiling. Promise me." Olivia, tears streaming down her face, brought his hand to her lips and kissed it. "I promise. But you have to promise me something too. Wait for me. On the other side, whatever comes next, wait for me." Quinton smiled, and it was the same smile he had given her 1,000 times over their decades together. "Always. I will always wait for you." Oh. He died just before dawn, slipping away peacefully with Olivia's hand in his. And when the sun rose over the Texas plains that morning, it felt to Olivia like the light had gone out of the world. She mourned him deeply, grieved for the loss of her partner and best friend, the man who had saved her life and given her everything she had never dared to dream of. But she kept her promise. She continued to paint, capturing the landscape they had both loved and the memories they had made together. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew what a remarkable man he had been. She sat on the porch in the evenings, and though she sat alone now, she could feel Quinton's presence beside her, a warmth and comfort that death could not diminish. Olivia lived to be 84 years old, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end, when she died peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night, surrounded by family. Her last conscious thought was of Quinton and the life they had shared. She had come to Texas as a broken young woman with nothing but desperation driving her forward. She left it as a matriarch beloved by dozens, an accomplished artist whose work hung in important collections, a woman who had transformed tragedy into triumph through sheer force of will and the steady love of a good man. At her funeral, Thomas stood to give the eulogy, now a gray-haired man of 63 himself, and he told the story of how his parents had met. He told of a pregnant woman stepping off a stagecoach and a cowboy who saw past circumstances to the person beneath. He told of a birth in a small ranch house with no doctor, of his father's shaking hands and fierce determination to protect the woman who would become his wife. He told of a love that had grown slowly and surely over decades, nourished by respect and kindness and genuine affection. "My mother used to say that she had been delivered twice," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Once from her mother's womb, and once by my father from the despair and fear that had consumed her life. She said that being delivered from that pain was the greater birth, the one that truly made her who she was. And my father, he would say that she delivered him too, from loneliness and emptiness, from a life half lived. They saved each other, and in doing so, they gave all of us the greatest gift imaginable. They showed us what love looks like when it is real and true and lasting." Olivia was buried beside Quinton on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the years of their lives. But their real memorial was in the family they had created, in the descendants who would carry their story forward, in the paintings Olivia had left behind, in the land Quinton had cultivated and made prosperous. They lived on in all of it. Two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and had built something beautiful and enduring. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the light turned golden and the air was soft with the promise of night, people said you could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old ranch house, holding hands and watching the sunset together, waiting for eternity with the same patience and love that had defined their time on earth. Whether it was memory or imagination or something more, it did not really matter. What mattered was the story, the truth of two people who had chosen each other and had lived out that choice through all the years they were given. The mail-order bride who came 7 months pregnant and the cowboy who delivered her baby had become legend, their story passed down through generations as a testament to the transformative power of compassion and love. It was a story that reminded people that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was show kindness to a stranger. Take a chance on someone when logic said to turn away, believe that broken things could be mended, and that love could grow in the most unexpected soil. And in the end, that was the legacy Quinton and Olivia left behind. Not just descendants and property and art, but the knowledge that love was always worth the risk, that families could be built by choice as surely as by blood, that delivering someone from their despair was the most sacred act one human being could perform for another. They had lived that truth every day of their marriage, and their story continued to inspire long after they were gone, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually work the ranch, hang Olivia's paintings on their walls, tell their own children about the remarkable couple who had started it all. The story would evolve and change with each telling, details added or forgotten, but the heart of it would remain the same. A woman desperate for salvation, a man brave enough to offer it, and a love that transformed them both into something greater than they could have been alone. That was the story of Quinton and Olivia Keller, the cowboy and his mail-order bride who had found each other in Amarillo, Texas in the summer of 1882, and had built a love that lasted not just a lifetime but generations. It was a story of redemption and second chances, of seeing the humanity in others even when circumstances made it difficult, of choosing compassion over judgment and love over fear. And it was a story that would endure as long as there were people to tell it, a reminder that the best love stories are not the ones that come easily, but the ones that are built moment by moment, day by day, through choice and commitment, and the unwavering belief that together two people can overcome anything.